Everybody ready? Let's do this. So, quality assurance. Who's very excited to learn about this today? All right, awesome. I heard from the back. When are we going to have time to actually do this? We'll talk a little bit about that. Yeah, we'll talk a little bit about that today. Quality assurance is kind of involved with everything. But look, we're going to make this as interesting as we can. It's a small group, so hopefully we can be collaborative. If I'm talking about anything and you have questions as we go, let's just discuss it there. We don't need to wait till the end. So what are we going to cover? Well, what is QA? I think there's a lot of misconceptions about what QA actually is, or at least what good QA is. We're going to talk about the software development lifecycle and QA. Where does QA actually fit when developing a product? Risk-based testing. Who's excited about that? That's fun. We'll talk about that. Why is QA important? I'm pretty passionate about QA, so we're going to spend some time on that for sure. We'll stop and do questions at the end. Again, I encourage questions as we go through this. Then we're going to do kind of an interactive session. We're going to pull a product that we have, a Neki product that we just developed, and we're going to actually run through what we've learned and actually put some stuff together. So that's that. So who is this guy? Why am I here? Well, I have 7 years of QA experience, and that's in a dedicated QA role. You know, larger companies where we actually had the ability to have a QA team that just focused on QA. What I did was client software, dial-up ISP software, Windows and Mac. I tested billing systems, I tested websites, mobile phone apps, and then all the supporting infrastructure behind those, databases, API servers, etc. So that's great, but why does this guy like QA? Well, I'm a process nerd, right? And QA, good QA, is a lot about process, and we'll talk about that some more. When you think about QA, it's kind of your last step in the chain, right? To actually protect your customers from you making bad decisions, whether that's poor software, poor usability, requirements, that don't actually make sense. It's kind of that last step in the chain. And another reason I like QA is I like to break stuff. Right? I was the kid who took the doorknobs off of doors, took toys apart before actually even putting batteries in them, right? So that's kind of my mentality. That's why I like QA. But most important to me is usability. I like products that you can actually use. And how many of you have downloaded an app from the App Store and either ended up deleting it right away, or it might still be on your phone but you only opened it once, right? Right. And a lot of that has to do with usability. So that's great. Let's get started here. What is QA? So I went to the source of record on the internet, Wikipedia, and I decided to pull the first sentence on the article for what is QA. And it says, quality assurance is a way of preventing mistakes or defects in manufactured products and avoiding problems when delivering solutions or services to customers. What? No. This is terrible. Let me tell you why. So I read on in this article. And it says, QA is applied to software to verify that features and functionality meet business objectives, and that code is relatively bug-free prior to shipping or releasing new software products and versions. Okay, relatively bug-free. That's kind of cool, right? We're starting to get there. As far as I remember, QA doesn't actually write software, so they don't create bugs, so they shouldn't prevent bugs. But nonetheless, we're getting better. We're getting closer, right? But QA is a lot more than just about testing. There's way more to QA. And I talked about this a little bit, right? But QA is really about process. Who's excited about process? Anybody? Okay, before I lose you, nice, I like that. Before I lose you, let me tell you this. Process can be as heavy or as lean as you want it to be. So imagine this, you could develop an application and simply ship it to your customers. That's awesome. Or you could maybe even have just a simple 4-step checklist where you run through the same things every time and just make sure that you didn't do anything, didn't make your product any worse, right? That's a simple process, but it's still process. But really what I want to get at here is to have successful QA, you need to know what role your product has within your business, and in particular, what is your product trying to do to make your business successful? So, I don't know, you think about Twitter, well, the Twitter app, it's pretty important that you're able to post tweets, right? That supports the business. That's a very basic way to look at it. But if you don't understand how your product supports your business goals, you're not really going to be able to perform effective QA, and we'll learn about that. All right. So I mentioned this already once too. What's most important to me? Well, most important to me is the usability of the product. And QA has a big role in that, right? While it is testing, you're not pointing, clicking, and saying something works or it doesn't work. That's not usability testing. And we're going to talk more about that. But what I'll leave you with on this is effective QA provides an assessment of overall product quality, including usability, and ensuring that your product supports your business needs. That's QA. That's real QA. So let's take an example. Who here has seen the Windows Metro UI? It's probably a good thing that you haven't. Who here is using Windows 8? Anybody? I see a lot of Macs. That makes me happy. Well, if you read online about the Windows Metro UI, you're going to learn one thing. Microsoft released a new UI as part of Windows 8 as a forced UI, and it was called Windows Metro. Well, what it was is a UI designed for touchscreen. What is Microsoft Windows' largest install base? Desktop computers, right? Corporations, all that kind of stuff. Well, when you force a touchscreen UI on somebody, and you're not running a touchscreen, can you imagine how you might interface with that? Well, suffice it to say, Windows 10, that's all but removed unless you install it on a touchscreen device. So, two questions there. One is, who is doing usability testing at Microsoft? They have a lot of money. I imagine they could afford spending some time on usability. But the other thing was, who is making sure that that product is really supporting the goals of the Windows OS and Windows OS business? I'd really love to ask them that. But anyway, so that's kind of what QA is, right? QA. So testing types. Yes, I have to go through this, so please bear with me. The rest of the presentation is going to get a lot more interesting, but so we can speak the same language, I just want to go through this real quick for you all. If you look online, there are many variations with how testing types are defined. If you Google it, if you go to working organizations. But I'm going to stick to these and give you very high-level definitions, and then we're going to talk more about that. But so Matt in the back, you guys all saw him a few weeks back. He spoke to you a lot about unit testing and white box testing. White box testing is, of course, when you can see the code. You can massage the code, you can talk to the code, you can put it to bed, make sure it's happy. You really know what's going on when you can see the code, right? Well, QA largely does black box testing. They don't see anything with the code. They don't see how something is supposed to perform the operation that it's supposed to perform. What they see is a specification which says the user should be able to add a product to their cart, and then they have the product with which they need to figure out whether or not that product can be added to the cart, right? So, largely these testing types are black box. And let's start with sanity testing. So sanity testing keeps you sane. Why? Sanity testing is what you run on, let's say, a new build, right? So you make some feature changes to your app, your website, whatever. You do a build, you push it to a server, you want to test it. So you run sanity testing. What that is a short little bit of testing that you run to determine whether or not this build is worth more testing. So let me give you an example of this. Let's say you are doing a mobile app. You produce a build of your app, you install it on your phone, you go to test it. You go to open it, it crashes. Okay, well it's going to be really hard to test that because well, it's crashing, right? Let's say it crashes 50% of the time, 60% of the time. It's probably not worth you spending a whole lot of time trying to test this build until you fix those core problems, right? So what a sanity test is a really brief set of testing that you run to figure out whether or not it's worth actually running additional testing. Any questions on that one? Sanity testing keeps you sane. So then we have regression testing. So regression testing is testing all of the existing features that you have in your product, not your new features, but your existing ones. You want to know why that might be important?
Well, if you add new stuff, then it probably breaks
Breaks existing stuff. Yes, absolutely. That happens way more frequently than we care to admit. We've probably seen that in very heavily used large company apps that we use today where all of a sudden you can't post. We're trying to figure out why that doesn't work forever. But nonetheless, regression testing is when you go back and test all the existing features in your product. And I'm glad you actually brought that up because if you think about it, what's the most important thing to your customers if you think about it? they're used to using all the features that they're used to using. So if you introduce a new feature and it doesn't work quite as well, they're not used to using that, right? They're going to care a lot less. But if you break something that they are used to using, they're going to care a lot more. This is probably the most important testing type that you can do because it ensures that your core functionality, your existing functionality continues to work. All right, everyone still with me? Okay, we're almost done with this part. So functional testing. Functional testing is taking a specification, making sure that the feature actually works according to specification. And in this case, we're talking about new features. So hey, I have a new feature. I want to be able to add an item to my cart. Your spec is going to have some sort of guidance as to how that's supposed to work from the end user perspective at least. So look at that spec, run your test, make sure that it works according to spec. System testing. So system testing is when you put all your pieces of your app together, or your website, or whatever the case is, and make sure that together the features work. You may find that features work great individually, but together they don't. I know my colleague, Mr. Matt in the back, talked about end-to-end testing, right? There's a lot of overlaps, and in some cases these two terms can be used interchangeably. The thing to note with end-to-end testing is that end-to-end testing, typically you're really thinking about how a user will flow through your application, right? So I'm going to search for a product, add it to the cart, pay for the product, and ultimately get the product at the end of the day. That's an end-to-end test, but really you're exercising the system. That's why there's a lot of overlap between these two. So, functional, single feature, system, all features. Quick way to know that. And then we have usability testing. I don't want to harp on this too much. Just make sure your target audience can actually use your app. So, if you're not sure about the usability of your app, one of the things you can do is find the find the most non-technical person you know, and see if they can use your product. Mom or dad, oftentimes good choices. But if you can't find a non-technical person, find someone outside of your industry. You'll find you make a lot of assumptions about how something should work because of what you know, and people within your industry will probably make those same assumptions. You want to find the person the most disconnected from your product, and if they can use your product, then you're probably doing pretty well on the usability front. That makes sense, everybody? So what might noticeably be missing here for some of you is automated testing. So automated testing is, of course, testing where you write code or you write scripts to perform certain functions and the computer executes it for you. Cool thing about automated testing is when you tell a computer to do something, it will do it every time and it will do it the same way every time. Right, so there's a lot of power in that as you have more and more builds and you run the same set of tests. You can see if there's some sort of variance in your program's outputs because, well, the computer is going to do it the same way and expect the same thing. So I want to give you an example of this. I worked at a large content and media business where it was a very large website. And what we had was an automated test suite which used the technology known as Selenium to actually open up a web browser, initiate clicks through. So let's just say, hey, I want to search for an article, or I want to click on a Facebook like button, I want to log in, I want to sign up. Well, you can script that and actually will run in a web browser, Chrome, Firefox, Safari. So you get cross-browser testing, which is great. You get a repeatable set of tests. And for us, this executed in less than an hour. So every time we got a build from development, we kick off our automated tests, right? We go get coffee, we go do whatever we're going to do. We come back and we get a really good baseline for quality. That doesn't change. As the build changes, our baseline for quality stays the same. So really why this is cool, aside from it doing a lot of repetitive work for us in QA, is that the human QA could focus on the functional and system testing of new features. And as part of that, they could write automated scripts, which then build the automated test base, which means you then have sanity and regression constantly getting covered, so that when you're developing new features, all you do is focus on the new features. So if you've ever done QA and you've had to sit there and click that sign up button at the same time, knowing that it doesn't change build after build, there's a lot of power in this, but also, as I mentioned, it runs for you much faster than you can do it yourself and click around. Sorry, so one other thing I want to talk about here is making sure that your product is testable. So as Matt talked to you about with unit testing, it's a lot simpler, right? You see the code, you write some unit tests that test the code, and if for some reason you can't write unit tests that effectively test the code, well then you can change the code, because you're right there, you see it. Right? Do a little refactor, make your code more testable. I know I talked to you about that a little bit. But with black box testing, you can't. right? So let's say you have a mobile phone app, right? A lot of that is probably driven by data, in some sense, right? Some sort of server data. But we take the shopping cart example, searching for products, that data is coming from somewhere, right? It's probably not within the app. So it's important that you think about how testable your application is. Well, we can talk about this for hours, and I won't bore you with that, but a lot of that has to do with the test environment. I just want to point out that every place that I've done QA has had a test environment. You know, what that meant was it gave us the ability to manipulate data as it will probably be on production without affecting production. Right, so if you have any questions about that, again, I'd love to dive into that with any of you. But it's always important to make sure your product can be tested, because oftentimes you'll get, you produce a product, you get to that point and you realize, well, I can't actually test this because I don't have any data to feed it, for example. So, anyways, we can talk more about that later. But that's the testing type, so we made it through the formalities. Everyone's still good? No one needs to jump up and down, shake it off or anything? So let's talk about the software development lifecycle and QA. So where does QA fit? Well, there's two major types of development methodology that you've probably heard of. Waterfall and Agile. I hear you guys do sprints, right?
Yep.
What are the sprint lengths?
Weekly.
Weekly, perfect. Okay. But then there's Waterfall. Has everyone heard of Waterfall? Is anyone passionate about Waterfall? Does anyone think it's a good idea? It works for a lot of things, but I want to take you through this. So it's a waterfall, right? Because steps is definitely not as sexy of a word to use. But the important thing to know here is that the first phase, or the phase preceding the next phase, has to be complete before you can move on to the next. Right? Okay, that's fine. Let's say your phases were at a minimum of a day, and we can complete everything within a day. So you could release once a week. Right? I don't like to deploy code on Fridays, so that gives me 4 days. So okay, we're getting a little bit constrained here, but let's just say that we can make this flow work within a week. Well, I want you to think about something here. If you end up in a case where, let's just say you find an issue in test, right, and you need to go back because it's a bad requirement, it's bad usability. So you need to go back to your product person in the case of a big organization, or maybe you guys are sharing that role. So okay, so now I need to go back to requirements. Oh, okay, well now I need to make changes, now I need to go back to implementation. Well, if these steps are at a minimum of a day, you can kind of see the push out, right? So waterfall is interesting, but what I really want to point out with it is, as it relates to QA, it's at the end. That sucks for a lot of reasons. Let's say you have to get a product out within a week, and you find problems. What about this phase is going to get shortened? QA, of course, right? And think about it, it makes sense. The first 3 phases, you're producing something. You're producing a new feature, you're designing that feature, you're developing that feature, you're putting it in your product. QA, well, you don't really hear about QA unless they're stopping your release, right? Otherwise, things are kind of just flowing through and things are good. Right? So in a big organization, you don't want to be that guy at the end coming back with 2 hours before your release window closes and says, we found a bug. So QA always gets squeezed in this model. That's really what I want to point out. And I want to give you an actual example. So at the large ISP I worked for, our dev to QA ratio was 2 to 1. Right? So, we had 10 developers, we had 5 QA. That's pretty expensive when you think about it. 5 QA people. And the reason was because, well, our schedule is one that's going to get shortened, but the business didn't want to lose quality, right? So what do? Well, we throw more resources at it. So that's an expensive cycle. These individual phases took 2 to 4 weeks. So now think about it from the business perspective. You're talking about a 8, 12-week cycle to get a product out. So I have a new idea for a feature. It's going to make us a ton of money. Cool, let's start this process. Well, 3 months later, you're getting that into production. What industries do you know that you can afford to wait 3 months to get something out where things haven't changed and now that feature is potentially irrelevant? So, waterfall works great, but waterfall's kind of old and busted. And let's talk about the new hotness, agile, right? Well, the roots of agile development actually can be found in a paper from Dr. Winston Royce in 1970. And he basically said, look, you shouldn't build software like you build an automobile, right? It doesn't need to be an assembly line. Things don't all need to happen first before the next phase, and I think that makes a lot of sense. Everyone knows about Scrum, right? So Scrum, the real essence of Scrum, if you really want to look at it, exactly following Scrum, is actually a pretty process-heavy methodology. Tight Scrum, as they call it, right? You've got your Scrum Master, your retrospectives. It's a really good process, and sure, you can run them in smaller groups. But most of what you're going to see is a loose Scrum implementation. That's probably what you're doing, and I'd love to actually know more about that after we finish this. But we take the good from what we find, and we move forward. So the thing to know about this, though, is aside from it being a circle and looks like it's moving fast, all the phases of waterfall are really there, right? But what you're doing is you're breaking off small chunks. You're doing things in small iterations because the goal at the end of the sprint is to have something that is complete. Generally deployable, but at least a complete unit, right? That's the idea. So this also provides you the opportunity to adjust rapidly. So let's just say we are working on a feature and we find a problem. And it was just a poor design, right? Or even better, it was a poor requirement, bad usability. Well, in the previous model I mentioned, something that might take 2 to 4 weeks to adjust, you could actually have it adjusted and fixed within a week. So that's pretty cool, right? But the big thing here is it allows you to adjust rapidly. So in a fast-moving industry, an agile development model is definitely what you want to have. Because every week you're sitting down, reassessing what it is you want to do, and your team is in the mindset, your deployment windows are in the mindset that you can actually execute this. So let me explain this with a real example. So the large content and media site I worked at, we had a dev to QA ratio of 4 to 1. So we had 20 developers, 5 QA, right? But what's even cooler about that is we had 5 push windows a day, 4 days a week. So we released code 20 times a week, or up to 20 times at least. And this was on a site that had 100 million unique users a day, right? So you can't go out and break stuff, right? With that kind. I mean, downtime was measured in minutes and at tens of thousands of dollars at that point, right? But why was this effective? Well, we bit off small chunks. We reduced the risk by having small amount of changes at a time. But we then would give us the flexibility of being able to release 20 times a week. That's pretty remarkable. So, at the end of the day, what's the difference? Well, I talked a little about it. Less risk in this model. But tying this back to QA, well, as a QA person, I'm dealing with less change, right? Less other things that could be impacting me. So when I put 5 features together, and those things don't work well together, well, if I'm in charge of testing this one feature, I'm stuck. Stop. But thinking about this, from a product perspective, or from you guys working on products, well, if you make changes in small chunks, if this is your mentality, finding bugs doesn't mean that you're impacting potentially your whole product. If you're running sprints, maybe you could just take another week, or maybe you could pull that feature out, but you're doing a small amount of changes at a time. So it's really powerful. You minimize risk. And in my experience, Agile has been the most effective. Now, to switch gears a little bit, where, if you have a dedicated QA organization, or if you're thinking about QA, if you're putting on your QA hat, where do you think QA should be involved in this process? When you do or think about QA now, when do you think about it?
Testing.
At the testing phase? So the most effective way that you can have QA is by involving and thinking about it at the beginning. Because you're going to think about, is my product testable? Am I going to be able to test to make sure that it's doing what I want? But even more than that, QA is going to be, as I talked about, before, more informed with what is the goal of this product and how is this product supporting my business. Because if they come in at the testing phase and they miss out on all this great figuring out your requirements and how something should work and why it should work a certain way, they're going to come in and see a spec and say, oh, A, B, click, click, does it work? Right? They're going to be a lot less effective than if they can come in and say, oh, well, I know that the goal of this was to get 10 million signups. Well, your signup process is kludgy. It's 10 screens when it could be 2. If the QA person is thinking about usability, which I really hope they are, and they know that your actual requirement was that, they're going to be better informed. Yeah?
At companies, how much does QA and user experience design kind of overlap or work together?
It really depends. In the waterfall model, the old and busted company, QA wasn't really involved. with the usability aspect. But they come in at the end, the good QA people would say, this doesn't really work well. They won't know, oh, it doesn't work well and also doesn't support your business goals, because they don't know what those goals are all the time. But they'll be coming in and saying, yeah, this is really hard to sign up for this product, for example. At another company I was at, QA was involved from the start. They were involved from the start, and they were able to offer a lot because they knew the customer best. That's the other thing, is QA and customer care or tech support, what have you, know your customer the best, because they're either receiving customer feedback directly or indirectly. Because QA and support generally work together. So you want to have your customer champion involved as early on as possible, right? So hopefully that makes sense. Does anyone have any questions on that? Okay, so we talked about a lot. So how can I have a bug-free product? What do you guys think? Tips for a bug-free product?
Lots of testing.
Lots of testing, okay. Anybody else? Bug-free, 0 defects. How do you get to that point? Oh, I tapped my screen! Darn iPhones. Alright, well you don't write a single line of code, folks. Let's think about it. If you're going to end up in one of 2 ways here. You're going to be testing forever, and your product, your idea, your features, it's going to be obsolete because either someone else is going to do it, it's a good idea, or your industry changes. Right? So this is always a compromise. It's a compromise. So how do I figure out how to make that compromise? Well, like I talked about before, if you understand what your product is supporting business-wise, what business goals it's going to fulfill for you, then you can start to make compromises on what type of defect am I willing to ship with. If you understand your product, it's going to be pretty interesting. It's going to be pretty interesting as to what you're willing to accept in terms of non-working functionality, or even more. So let's dive in a little bit further. So how do we really do this? Well, we do risk-based testing. So once you understand what your product is supposed to do and how it's supposed to support your business, then you can start to make compromises. So we're going to actually break this down completely on the next slide, but let me tell you a little bit of the story. So how many people have iPhones? I see a lot of Macs, that makes me happy. iPhones, okay. So the original iPhone, right? So 6 weeks before it was supposed to go to manufacturing, Steve Jobs, of course, had a prototype iPhone, and he carried it in his pocket, right? We all do. So the screen was made of plastic at that time. So he brings all of his engineers into a room, pulls a phone out of his pocket, and says, this screen is scratched. 6 weeks before manufacturing. He's like, you guys got to figure out how to put glass on this. So they did. They do. The original iPhone comes out with glass. It's gotten better, of course. Many, many smartphones have glass screens. Not all, but many. But you got to wonder, oh, jeez, I'm getting excited here. Put this down. You got to wonder, had that change not happened, would the iPhone have been as successful? I don't know. But it's definitely something interesting to think about. He thought that was a showstopper. Right. Okay. Sorry. Base testing how-to. All right, so we're going to walk through this. My example app is going to be Twitter. Everyone here uses Twitter, right? So there's a chart, right? So here's how we kind of do this. And this is actually a pretty straightforward and pretty powerful process. As far as testing goes, I think this is the most important thing that I'm going to talk about. So, all right, feature in test, right? So what you want to do, very simple, is break out your application into a set of features. So in Twitter, posting a tweet's a feature, right? Logging in is a feature. Creating an account's a feature. So just quick breakdown. You'll find that this will become more granular over time. Things will pop in and out of this list as it matters, but the important thing is to lay out your features, right? Because this is what you're going to be able to do. Risk. So for every feature within your app, for every build, right, and of your app as well, you're going to say, what is the risk that this feature is going to experience problems? So how do you figure that out? Well, is the feature brand new? Have you ever tested it? If not, then there's a high risk that you're going to probably encounter something, right? Did it work well prior, or in the prior version? This is something oftentimes forgotten, right? So let's just say that you either decided not to run a lot of testing, or you found a lot of defects in your prior version, but it wasn't important enough for you to stop the release, so you released. Well, it's still a high risk you're going to find issues there, right? Because you know there were issues there before. Was this an existing feature and did it change? How drastically did it change? A couple lines of code, maybe fairly straightforward, highly unit tested, you might have a lower risk. But another thing to think about here with the risk of a change is, is there something maybe on the server side that I can use to control this application? So let's think about that, who you should follow widget, right? You guys, I think we've all seen that on the Twitter site. Yeah, because of all the data we've mined about you, we think you should follow these people too. So possibly on the server side, if I feed that widget with no data, the widget would collapse away, user wouldn't know if it didn't work because it wouldn't be there, right? Just an idea, right? So that might lower your risk because you have options. But risk, in this sense, for the feature that you're talking about, is based on what are the chances that there are going to be problems here. Does that make sense, everybody? So priority. So priority is, based on all the features I have listed here, which we're going to have in a minute, what's the priority with which I want to make sure I test it? So you're going to have high, medium, low, 1 to 10, whatever scale you want to use. But the power of this field, when you think about your testing process, is as you get squeezed, as you start running out of time, you've already now rated all the things that you want to test within your app. So low priority items, very easy. Let me just knock that off, right? So it really helps in organizing your testing, and when inevitably you want to meet an objective and you don't have enough time to test everything. And then there's impact. So impact is twofold. Impact to the customer and impact to the business. So let's think about that posting a tweet example. From the customer's perspective, if I can't post a tweet, well, that's kind of the whole deal with Twitter, right? That's a pretty high impact item. I'm going to be pretty upset if that doesn't work, right? So that's going to be high impact. From the business perspective, let's say that, and I'm making things up maybe, Twitter mines all that data, gets that tweet data, they're able to sell it or make some sort of good amount of information off of it, so if my customer can't post a tweet, I'm upset too. So you always want to think about impact from the customer and the business side. The power of this, though, there's two big pieces, and I talked about one of them. When you start running out of time, you look at your priority, your risk, your impact matrix, and then you can really figure out what you're willing to cut in terms of testing goes, or at least maybe focus a little bit of attention in order to meet an objective and release a product. But the other side is, as you start encountering defects, you're going to be able to go to this chart and say, I found a defect in my posting a tweet. Well, that is a high impact item, right? That highly impacts my business and my customers. So I'm probably going to need to fix that. Versus that darn who you want to follow widget, which is low impact, where I don't care about. That's probably a defect on your shipware. Does that all make sense? All right. So let's do the Twitter app. Feature and test. Update. Am I able to update the app? Does anyone know why I might want to have a high risk, high priority, high impact on that item? We didn't talk at all about update. We talked about posting a tweet. Why would that be the first thing that I mentioned?
If you deploy something with bugs, then you have the ability to fix it.
Exactly. That is where I try to start my testing if I'm talking about anything that is an application-related item. Something that is not served on a web page. Because you'll find that everything else matters just a little bit less if you can provide an update and fix these items. Right? So in this example, let's break it down a little bit. So high risk. Well, hypothetically, in this Twitter app that I'm talking about, let's say that we completely change the update mechanism, right? So the code changed drastically. That's why my risk level is high. Again, this is for our made-up example. Priority is high just because of what we talked about, right? This needs to work for a lot of reasons. Because, largely, the impact is high. If I cannot update this, my customers will be upset, I'll be upset, and I will likely lose customers because if I deploy something that's buggy, well, I'm not going to be able to fix it, right? You'll see that these tie together, and as you build this matrix, you're going to adjust all of these risk, priority, and impact items based on looking at it as compared to other features. But hopefully that makes sense for the update. But let's get into the actual part of the app. So posting a tweet. All right, so let's say that I completely change this code. So risk level is going to be high. Because everything changes, a high likelihood that there's something wrong there. But here you have the priority medium. Again, we talked about this. Posting a tweet, that's core. How could you ever get a medium? Well, again, if I'm looking at this, if I can update the app, well, that gives me a lot of flexibility with other areas, right? If I can update it, I can afford defects in other areas. Impact high, we talked about that. You know, being able to post a tweet is core to your customer and to your business, so I don't think there's any question with the impact of that not working. So let's move on. The display feed, you know, where you get to see everybody else's tweets. Risk medium. So in our hypothetical example, let's do this. Let's say that I change the way the tweet data renders, right, for the user. But let's say that I used an open source rendering engine, something on the web that's very well vetted, known to have very little defects. Right, so I've integrated that into my application. Risk level medium. Well, why would it be medium? Well, because the only thing that's changed here, the only thing that's not known is my integration point with this third-party module. Knowing that the third-party module is solid, I think it's a pretty safe bet to say that it's a medium risk. Sure, there'll probably be issues, but the core functionality of displaying the tweet, that's probably going to work because my code changes, my unique code pieces for this was pretty minimal. Again, so I'm integrating a third-party module. Priority medium, you know, I think we talked about that. If posting a tweet is medium priority, being able to see other people's tweets is probably equally as important for me to test. Impact medium. How could I give displaying the feed an impact of medium and posting a tweet impact of high? Well, we're going to make some assumptions about the behavior of users, right? Of Twitter users. Everybody wants to post a tweet. Everyone wants to be heard. But you may find, and in this hypothetical example, let's say that this is true, a lot less people want to actually look at other people's tweets. Now we know this is probably unlikely. But if we assume that that's the case, well, more of my customers want to do this, and less of them want to do this, and this drives more traffic to my website, and I'll make more ad revenue, or I make more money off the data of people tweeting and the mining of data that I do there, than I do of looking at other people's, that might actually rate it a medium. And we're being very hypothetical here, but does that make sense to everybody? And kind of how we're getting to that point of making that decision? And the importance of actually understanding your customers. It's going to help you build this, and I hope that that's what you're all shooting for as you're putting your products together. All right. Next up, notifications. Tweeted you, or mentioned you in a tweet, someone sent you a direct message. So, risk level low. In our hypothetical example, I made no changes to this code. I have a very little chance that I'm going to actually find some issues there since we didn't make any changes. Priority low. Well, maybe self-explanatory at this point. These things are really important to me as a business, as to my customers, and this is a little less so. Impact medium. Well, how did I come about that determination? Well, I'm making up some things again about the Twitter user behavior. Let's say that notifications drive traffic to the app. Will it drive traffic to our app? Yes, they will. But the actual notification mechanism itself, going in there and looking at the 100 notifications about people mentioning me, drives less traffic, and the reason is because of just that. You know, when I see that someone has mentioned me, I want to go to the app and look at what's in the app. But I don't actually go through all 100 notifications because it's impossible. I don't really care about all the mentions that I have. So what the notification feature does from the business perspective is it makes me open the app. Okay. That to me is medium impact. Medium impact if that doesn't work, because if it doesn't, less people are going to open the app. But the full feature itself working very well, like that those 100 people, or those 100 notifications are actually accurate, a little bit less so. So that's how I kind of put some data together, of course made up things about Twitter, and then came to the medium impact. Hypothetical, but you can kind of see my thought process there. Hopefully that's clear and helps you guys out. If not, feel free to ask me any questions. Oh, my favorite who to follow module. Okay, well, risk level low, we made no changes there. Priority low, look, again, I'm making stuff up, but who really cares if that doesn't work in my product? Posting a tweet's important. Who to follow? If you don't make suggestions, if I don't follow more people, let's just say that doesn't impact my business and my customers don't care about it. Okay, so I'm going to give that a low priority. And for the same reason, a low impact. So we quickly put this together, and I was kind of throwing a bunch of stuff out there and making assumptions. Does anyone have any questions? Most importantly, does everyone see the value in this and how this lets you do two things? One, prioritize your testing. So as you start running out of time, you have already decided what you're not going to look at. And two, as you encounter defects, oh shoot, I can't update, very high priority. Or, my notifications, found some defects in notifications, maybe not so important. So the two big things you get out of doing something like this, and you can really do this just about as quick as I just did. So hopefully people see the value in that, and I mentioned this is probably the most important thing from a testing perspective that I'll mention today, so I really hope that I can leave you with that. Okay, we're just about done here. Why QA? Well, customers have a choice and you want them to choose you, right? I mean, that's the primary thing. You want your product to be broken in the least visible way and the most recoverable way. Nothing will be perfect. Don't shoot for the bug-free product, you won't release the product. Right? So QA as a whole is very important. But it's not just testing, and I hope I've made that very clear, and I hope you guys see the value in that. It's not about point and click, yes, this works the way, the requirements say it should work. It's about understanding the overall quality of your product. Is it usable? And maybe most importantly, does it support your actual business goals? That's effective QA. That's where I can sit down and say, look, here's the quality of your product as a whole. Not just that feature XYZ works, because if someone can't use it, it doesn't matter. Alright, so let me give you a little bit of my experience, a little bit more. So I've done QA as a one-man team. I've done QA in a team of dedicated testers. And I've actually run a few QA organizations, right? But right now, Matt and I are software engineers at NetKey. We're also the QA people. We're also the operations people. We push the kind of do everything, right? Because we are the technical team. And Matt may have gone through this with you, but we've got a CEO, CFO, Jeff joined us, a business development manager, thanks for coming, Matt. And then that's it, aside from our office assistant, right? So we kind of do all the technical. We actually apply everything that we just talked about in what we do every single day. And we do it with 2 people, and we do it with shared roles. And we find that actually makes us faster. Right? We know exactly what we need to do, in what order, what's a breaking defect, what's not, and we run weekly sprints. And we push, a few days, right? So we're pretty agile, and yet we have this process, this dreaded process, that is actually pretty straightforward and simple. I mean, we have a wiki with some sanity, and some regression test cases, right? Just list it out. We don't have the test cases. Just like, hey, make sure you can add a wallet, add a NetKey wallet, which we'll talk about in a little bit. Make sure you can create an account. Very basic stuff. That's process. That's what I'm talking about. This isn't, a 20-page document, a test plan. Has anyone seen a test plan? Like a real test plan? Don't even bother. Don't even bother. I hope you'd see a risk-based testing matrix in there, but you probably would. But what I really want to leave you with is, and I think a lot of people here, and correct me if I'm wrong, you're all kind of doing the shared role, right? You're probably working together as a team. Do you have defined roles, or is everyone kind of doing a little bit of everything?
Loosely defined.
Okay. Well, assuming you join a startup, you're going to find that that's going to be likely the case, and in more cases than not, you're probably going to be in multiple roles at the same time. But QA, you kind of need to take a step back when you think about this, especially when you're wearing multiple hats, right? Because Matt and I have talked about this. As an engineer, you write software that works a certain way, and you say, well, I know how to use this product, everyone else should, right? Well, that's where the usability testing comes in, because you might find that mom and dad didn't think to right-click on something. They may say right-click, well, where's my other mouse? Like, how do I do a right-click? But it's just, you gotta kind of step away from that and realize that people aren't gonna necessarily use your product the same way you do. So it's hard for us sometimes, because we need to actually do that. But that's why Matt's dad signed up and was one of our first customers. Usability testing, you'll find, can be pretty humbling. I stress that a lot. You're going to learn a lot from that, right? Find somebody else to use your product. If you haven't done that yet, and I hear you guys would have a couple weeks left in your cycles.
Yeah.
If you haven't done that yet, I would do it right away. I'll do it. I mean, I'll use it. I'm not sure what project you guys are working on, but I would love to give you feedback. But whenever you have someone performing that QA role, I'm not talking about your dad, but someone actually performing that role. In order for them to provide you with effective QA, they need to be able to answer 2 questions. Can they actually build that risk-based testing matrix if you didn't give it to them? Do they understand what your product is supposed to do to support your business goals? the two things that I've stressed, right, that you need to do to perform effective QA. If they can't do that, don't rely on somebody else to do that for you. So hopefully at first you can answer those questions for yourself, then you can guide them, right? But with this, considering you're all doing shared roles, make sure you can answer those questions when you're thinking about QA. QA is always important. If you don't get that by the end of this presentation, there's probably not much more I can tell you about that now. But I just want to stress, you know, whether you're working at Apple where you've got a huge dedicated QA team, or you're doing it yourself, you know, applying these principles is just going to make sure that you really understand where your product's at and if it's actually going to be supporting the business goals. So I hope that you can see that. And to sum it up, because I like to sum it up, you know, effective QA provides an assessment of overall product quality, including usability, and making sure that that product actually supports your business needs. I repeated that because it's important. It'll be on the test later. So that's really it. We're going to actually do a live example, but I want to take a break for a second, see if anyone has any questions. Okay, so let's do this. Give me just 1 second to get set up here, so everyone wants to check your Twitter. It's cool. Does anyone use Facebook anymore? Nobody? I use Facebook, it's cool, man.
Well, it's like, it's not so much like adding photos and updating status, it's just an easy way to message people.
Okay.
So you need to.
No, absolutely not how I use it. So you're the Facebook Messenger, I can't stand that I have to do that in a different app.
Oh, I don't like that either. It's just some of the projects and stuff.
Okay, gotcha.
Wait, what is it?
No, you can't.
Oh, internet.
Yeah, so we need to do that for sure.
Okay.
Guest wireless, is that the way to go? Is that going to be a whole problem?
It should work. It'll work. It's.
Why is everybody hesitating?
It might work, maybe.
work.
I was signing up a secure one. Wireless for you.
If it works, we're good. No, it works.
Alright. Sometimes it give you hiccups.
Okay.
Can you go back to this one?
Depends how many people are on campus.
Yeah. So we'll take me pick up. Yeah, well, right now.
Yeah. Yes, my schedule becomes 11, so I can cancel it back.
You may need to get creative if we can't get Coinbase to load. Do you guys do filtering on the guest that's different than secure?
Yeah. Let me log in for you.
Stop
Sure.
looking at those sites, Frank.
It's Bitcoin.
This.
I
Does
get
photo
it.
view still exist?
Crazy.
Okay, so this one is just the pop-up one?
Yeah. Okay, you get it.
Okay, cool. And then where is photo
You guys have
view
an expired
being
certificate?
called? What does
Yeah.
it mean?
They made it like business class and stuff like that. And, yeah. For the public ones, to block a lot of things like
Okay.
verticals and stuff.
And that's in.
Gotcha.
Okay, got you. So.
I lost my mouse.
Hmm?
I lost my mouse. I'm getting malware. There we go.
Awesome.
Yeah, no, it should be. Oh, can you do
This is blazing
this
fast.
doesn't happen, or does this happen constantly?
Like, wow.
It's so awful.
You can just
Hey.
tether your phone and it's better than this.
It's been a while.
I
Wow.
haven't been on.
What's that?
Unless your carrier doesn't want you to tether.
Can't get authorized for Coinbase.
Yeah.
For the license.
You play,
I have Bitcoin Pass on my.
Oh, you play
Oh,
You play Bitcoin.
I don't think.
Yeah, who is Bitcoin here? You got Bitcoin? Does your project have anything to do with Bitcoin?
No.
Hey, we don't judge.
That'd be cool. Bitcoin. Watch that. They don't have logs.
New logs. They have like special logs that they can only like attach.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. It is pretty cool.
They're public.
Well, I'm done at time. We're here to a new feature that we have. So, let me give you a quick and dirty of what Netkey does. And I think Matt mentioned this to you last week, just to make sure we're on the same page. So, you go to google.com in your web browser. You end up getting a web page. Bless you. There's some magic that happens behind the scenes. Well, there's a lot of magic, I guess, maybe, but the biggest thing is that google.com gets translated into an IP address. This is done through DNS. Some of you probably heard about that. So essentially what happens is I put google.com in my web browser, I end up on the Google servers in the back end, right? So what we do at Netkey, at least with our wallet name product, is we take a Bitcoin address, and we utilize DNS and a wallet name, a friendly name, to actually resolve that. So imagine if you had to, oh, by the way, a wallet name is a 32-character alphanumeric case-sensitive address, right? So imagine if you had to send an email to someone's 32-character alphanumeric address. That's how email works. That would kind of suck, and it probably wouldn't end up taking off, right? So that's a big barrier to entry to Bitcoin. Actually, I can probably show you Bitcoin address. Maybe.
Yeah, just go to send and hit receive.
Send and hit receive.
I mean request, that's what I mean. BCC wallet?
This is not our product.
Oh, that's awesome.
Anyways, you'll see it actually with our product, and you'll see why it makes it awesome. Okay, so that's what we're trying to solve, right? At a high level. And what we came up with was a Chrome extension that lets you look up a wallet name and resolve it to a wallet address. There's not much here, as you can see. You've got, report a site lookup issue, which you'll see that in a minute. Settings, enable the automatic lookup and replacement. You'll see a multi-currency option in a minute as well. And then visit our site. Plug. Oh, there's a Bitcoin address. Right? So imagine if you had to use this every day, and probably not going to memorize that. By the way, if you mess up one of those characters, that money is gone. Can't get it back. So, all right. So we came up with this. We have people that have wallet names, right? Which is the friendly name. So you can send me money to wallet.frankcontreras.me. I encourage you all to do that. Actually, if you want to do that right now, we can pause for a minute. But that's how you would send me money. That's pretty memorable, I'd say. Right? It's not something you're going to forget. So let's say we want to do that. So let's send money. Oh, look what just happened there. Right? So that was actually done with the Chrome extension. That was not done on this particular website. So what happened was it translated that wallet.frankcontreras.me, looked up on the back end, did a little DNS, and returned this address. So this is what the extension allows you to do. I promise I'm not plugging our service, but it was a good opportunity for us to test something. So if we think about this, what's important with this product? What's important that actually works with this product? So if we're thinking about building a risk-based testing matrix, what would be one of the items that we're going to want to include?
The conversion or translation from the person's wallet name to the actual 32-character address.
Okay, that's a pretty core piece of this, right? I'd say for sure. So again, this is a brand new extension, right? We just wrote it. Matt just wrote it. I don't take any credit. I was on vacation when we did it. What do you think the risk level of there being a problem in this function is?
I guess high.
Yeah, because we don't know, right? We just wrote it. Matt just wrote it. What do you think the priority of us making sure that we test this before deployment?
High.
Yeah, it's a pretty core part to this feature, right? What do you think the impact of this not working is?
High as well.
Yeah, right. Because if it doesn't work, we're not selling wallet names, and even worse in this case, if you think about it, people are on Coinbase's site. People are going to be going to Coinbase saying, "Hey, why is my wallet name not working?" It's like, I didn't talk to Netkey. It's a disaster for both sides. Right? It's a bad partnership situation, let's say. All right, so I'd say y'all nailed it. Right? High on this. Hallelujah, if you will. Now, what we didn't talk about though is update. Right? That's probably also pretty high. Right? I think that's always high with anything that you're delivering to a customer. So there's a couple ways that this would work. You saw the automated way. There's another way you can do this. Matt, help me.
Your screen's too small.
Oh, we found a bug. Ideally, in here, you would also have lookup wallet names. This is why we test, right? I mean, that's good. This is not production software. So cool. We found our first bug. I like it. Now, actually, it's pretty good that this happened. If this works like magic, when you blur out, right, when you click out of this, and it doesn't work like this, please work this time, doesn't. How would you rate that defect? Lower, certainly, right? Because if your users are used to the magic of just typing and it works like that, that's probably going to be a little bit of a lower risk. Now, if you find, for example, that the auto magic click out way of looking at doesn't work with all websites, maybe doesn't work with some of your biggest partners, that might actually raise the priority of that defect, right? Yeah, that's interesting. Okay. All right, so we have some other features here. Right? Enable the automatic lookup replacement. Ooh, enable multi-currency automatic replacement. Let's try that out. Which one is it, Matt?
JustinNewton.me.
Oh, sweet. So he has multiple currencies for his wallet. So that's kind of cool, right? So this is obviously a feature. It's a linked feature, but let's consider it separate for the point of this discussion. Where would you rate this on a priority? Or, actually, does anyone want to try and rate that? I'm glad you're hesitating because you don't have all the information to actually figure that out. What might be the question you'd want to ask in figuring out how important this feature is?
Is it a feature that differentiates you from any potential competition that you
Okay,
have?
that's a good one. That's a good one. What else? What else?
Like how high is, like what percentage of your transaction volume is on Bitcoin compared to like Litecoin or
Yeah.
another digital currency?
Yeah, and linked to that is how many users actually have multiple currencies in their wallet. Right? All good things that you need to think about. But that's, again, you need to have some amount of data. And this is why I stress understanding the business to perform effective QA, because if you don't know your customer, if you don't know your business, it's going to be hard to do more than just pointing and clicking and thinking of a response. So let's Litecoin that, and boop, there it is. So simple product. We just developed a test matrix together that we're going to probably go back and look at a few of the bugs we found along the way. You may have noticed a little bit of the usability here. Let me do this, pull this up one more time here. Not so much usability, it's just like, oh, you know, this guy's kind of hanging over the heading here, right? The close box. Does escape work? Well, the escape thing may be a bigger deal, but that X kind of covering the heading, what priority do you think you give something like that?
Open them.
Yeah, would that stop your product release? Hope not.
Which, by the way, has not been released yet. Just to
Yes,
cover that.
yes, this is dev, so we've not released a bad product. Matt, your products are great. You do great work, especially when I'm on weekend. All right, so we quickly did this. We wanted to have a little bit of a live example, kind of apply what we learned. Does anyone have any questions?
Show the other awesome example.
Which other awesome example? Oh, the one that doesn't work?
Oh, this is great.
Okay, so this is the same code, same extension, same browser, but for some reason, in here, I'm using my name so you all send me money. Okay, so something didn't work really. Oh, wait, so I click and I see this address. I'm not sure. It doesn't like it, obviously the site's saying, hey, there's a problem, this isn't good. But yet it's there. So as we were actually testing with real testing with a potential partner, we found this, so it's like, that's interesting. Same code on our side, but you can kind of see on the integration side how things don't quite work the same way. Probably a high priority, depending on how important that partner is, how many customers they have, But yeah, so that was pretty interesting. Alright, I showed you other example. I'm going to quickly put up my email address again. Feel free to take it down. I love testing. I love automation. I love writing code. I love process. So I'm happy to talk to you all about any of the stuff that you're working on if you want another perspective. This kind of stuff is cool. Open source stuff is cool. Yeah.
I guess this is kind of like random, but
Yeah.
like, why do you guys like Bitcoin, and like what motivated you to like start this? Because I think it's a really cool idea.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of different things that the people I've worked with. So I started working in '99, and I worked for the COO of our company, and the CTO, the COO, and then the CEO as well, at past companies. So when they say, hey, we're doing this thing in Bitcoin, I'm like, well, Bitcoin's cool, right? I kind of know a little about it, but I love you guys, so let me look into it more. But Bitcoin really has the opportunity to change people's lives, right? I mean, there are a lot of people unbanked. There are a lot of regions of the world where you can't trust your bank. I mean, funds get seized all the time in countries that you'd probably be kind of surprised about. Argentina. Bitcoin, you can't do that, right? That's just not a possibility. So it really opens up a lot of opportunities. But then there's the whole blockchain technology and everything that people are doing with that. That's where you're going to see a lot of development over the next year, right? The technology itself is cool. It's in an area where we can actually make a difference in the world. And I've worked at ISPs and content providers, right? Like, cool, delivering content's important, but it's not like this, right? There's not that potential. That's why I like it. Jeff, I'm going to introduce the business development manager. See if he wants to chime in on that. He's been in Bitcoin, I think, forever.
Yeah, I mean, I graduated college in not too long ago in 2014, and had a startup with a couple friends that we created while we were in school, and then got some funding, and that's still going on. But the reason I was really interested in this in particular is that the technology is so new, and especially when you talk about money and value transfer, there's a lot of cultural aspects to that take time. Excuse me, take time to evolve. So the idea of like a DNS for the blockchain, something really infrastructure level that can apply to a bunch of different things, really appealed to me, since I don't really know how it's going to take form in the future, but I know that it will take form.
Cool. What's up?
In an industry that deals specifically with Bitcoin, which really isn't sponsored by any government, do you worry about job security at all?
I don't worry about job security a lot because of what Jeff just mentioned. We're involved in not just Bitcoin, but companies that make their business with the blockchain, and that's just a great technology. That's here to stay. Whether the currency does, well, the currency is really tied to the blockchain, but whether the importance of the currency, who knows, right? Who knows what's going to happen there? There are, if you look at the industry, though, a lot of companies that have been traditional wallet providers that are pivoting pretty dramatically, because being just a Bitcoin holder is not such a profitable business. You heard of smart contracts or anything like that? Moving contracts and the fingerprint of a contract and the transfer of value between individuals onto the blockchain. That's kind of cool, man. Look at that. But the industry is really evolving and it's trying to find a place. I'm not worried, but companies that don't evolve, as with in any new industry, even the internet early days, are going to be in a world of hurt. That's the risk you take going into the industry, though. But it's cool. All right, everybody. Thank you very much. I'm so stoked that I was able to come here. Yeah, what's up?
Before I stop you there,
Yeah.
One more question.
Yeah.
What's the fine balance between keeping on the same release date every week versus pushing the feature which has a maybe high priority, high risk, and just push that release to the next sprint instead? What's the fine balance there between QA and bugs? And
I mean, gosh, there's so many factors to that. Like, let's say you have a conference, right? You need to have that product out for the conference. Well, maybe you can't push anything out, right? Maybe you have to deal with it. And that's why, by doing the prioritized-based testing, I've already tested that my update mechanism works, for example, in our Twitter app. So, anything else? Well, I'll just have to fix it later. and I know that I can. So you really have to take all factors into account. But the cool thing about having the short cycles is that if you push out, maybe you are just pushing out a week or a day, right? That's why I like Agile.
Cool. All right.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you very much.